The first thing I do with people is say, define for me your purpose in life. And that purpose is broader than their corporate life, but really, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And that's a little bit difficult for people because it makes them think differently. But once you define what that purpose is, everything that I need to do that's important in my life must be done through that lens. And I recommend that for anybody at any stage of their life, but particularly those who are thinking about retirement. Define your ultimate purpose and what is it that's going to get you up in the morning to do things.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. If you are anything like me, you've made the mistake of blaming time for not getting everything you want to get done in your life. Statements like, I don't have time, or there aren't enough hours in the day, are as common to say as they are to hear from others. But if we're being honest with ourselves, they're just excuses that help us feel better about how our priorities are playing out in our lives. And if you're curious about getting more intentional with the way you use time, then turn up your volume because my guest today is David Buck, and he wrote a book on the subject called The Time Optimized Life. I feel certain you'll get at least one great nugget of wisdom out of our conversation, and hey, if not, you'll at least get to hear about the type of person I find to be more proud of their lifestyle than both vegans and crossfitters combined. And man, that's saying a whole lot. David Buck, thank you for being here on A Joyful Rebellion today.
Honor to be here. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
We're here to talk about something that people, okay, guys, don't roll your eyes when I say we're talking about your time, because it is the most important thing. And don't roll your eyes when I say it is the most important thing. You know it is, right? We all know it is. And David's here to help us get the most out of it. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I grew up seeing a lot of time management books around my house, around when I got into school and college. It was all about manage your time. Even my grandfather told me one time, he said, you know, you've got the same 24 hours a day as Bill Gates does. And what you do with it is going to determine where you end up. And that was, I got to admit, that was a little intimidating. So David, you're going to help us gently go through the process of understanding how maybe we can get a little bit more out of our time. This podcast is all about people who want more life out of life.
Right.
And doing good things with your time is going to get you there. So what got you interested in this topic?
Most of my career has been in what's called business development. That's just another fancy word for I was a salesperson. And I learned early on in my career, and heavy on the sarcasm right now, that my amazing good looks and my stunning personality weren't going to get me anywhere. And so I found quickly that if I was better prepared than my competition, I usually got the sale. Then I also learned from that when I used my time well, and I was mindful of my clients and how I was asking them for their time. When I became more efficient, I found that that was one of the foundational areas for my success over a 35 plus year career. And I've always been fascinated by time. So it was natural for me about 5 years ago, I found myself helping family members and then friends of friends, help them organize how they used their time. And I said, well, maybe I have a business here. So that's where 4 years ago, I started my business to help individuals, teams, even entire businesses understand how they can be as productive and time efficient in career. And then I also now help individuals and couples who are headed into retirement try to figure out how they're going to use all that extra time that they have in retirement.
Extra time. Yeah. I talked to someone a little while ago about creativity, and the conversation was, okay, a lot of people are holding on to whatever they think creativity is until they get into those years where they're retired and they think they have time to use it. Not all of us have all that much time. We don't know it. We have no clue how much time we have, right? So when it comes to helping people understand how to work with their time, one thing I started at the very beginning, I kind of offhand told everybody, hey, don't roll your eyes because we're talking about time management. Have you found that people do react in a certain way when you come up with the words time management? What's the normal reaction that you get? I guess not normal, but what's the generalized reaction?
The generalized reaction is that people tend to know that they have some time management challenges, but they feel it's not a big enough part of their life that they have to worry about it. And it's when you begin to uncover and unpack where people are seeing their strengths and their opportunities that people begin to realize, well, there's some steps I can make in my life if I just change some things that will make time more efficient and maybe feel like you have more time, even though we all consume time at the same rate. We use it differently. And you mentioned there at the beginning about using your time. And so if you begin to understand how I can use my time better, then you'll find you can get more stuff done. But this is where the part where people kind of sometimes stop a little bit because counterintuitively, you have to invest time to be able to figure out how to use your time. And that's where some people are kind of like, I don't have time, Dave. Why are you asking me to do that?
Right. I don't have time to save time. There's not enough time for me to figure all that out. Okay. That's one of the attitudes or maybe mindsets that people have when someone wants to intentionally go from the mindset of dealing with their time or using their time however they have learned from, and you usually learn it pretty early on in your family. Mm-hmm. And some people will come home from, like, maybe you came home from school, and I know I did. You got a snack, you maybe watched some TV, and you maybe figured out somewhere in there when you were going to do your homework. Wasn't very structured in my family, and you don't typically grow up and it changes overnight. Maybe you have some experiences later on in life where maybe you compare to someone else who is where you want to be, and you say, oh, what are they doing? And you have a model to work off of. But when someone doesn't have a model to work off of and they've just been cruising the way they've been cruising, what are some of the steps you help gently ease them into this mindset of optimizing their time?
First is, to that point, is to understand they need to optimize and not manage their time. I'm not critical of the phrase time management. It's out there. We kind of understand what that concept is. But when I see people and I say, okay, show me how you, quote, manage your time, what I find is they're very reactive. Something comes in, that all of a sudden becomes the most important. So they may manage that activity very well, but they may find themselves either at the same place or even further behind because they had all these other more important activities that should have gotten done before that one. So I say when you manage your time, you have a tendency to be reactive. I want to flip the script and basically say, think about optimizing your time. Simply, how can I be more proactive? And that involves really three key areas. How am I going to prepare to use my time? How am I going to execute against that preparation that I do? And then finally, how am I going to control the outcomes? And those three, preparation, execution, and control, weave together in a constantly changing state as you need to address how you're using and consuming time. That becomes then the basis for you to constantly plan everything out.
That's a great point, because sometimes, and especially today when we've got a lot of social media promoting this hustle culture, and people constantly, you know, if you get more than 3 hours of sleep a day, you're a loser. Or, I see that on my Instagram and I'm like, dude, you're crazy. But even planning for downtime is important, because think of the athletes. If you just work your muscles, work your body's going to break down. So they have to plan in days for recovery, and they don't call it rest days. They don't call it, I'm going to take a nap all day. It is a recovery day, so that their body, their mind, and everything that needs to be functioning at its peak performance the next time they need to do that, it's recovered, so they're able to do it. And that's where you said about the outcomes. what are some of the methods, or what are some of the maybe guiding principles that you talk to people about when they are creating a plan to optimize their time?
In my practice, I use an assessment tool with which that becomes the foundation. But within that assessment tool, there's what I call 5 categories that we look at. The first one is my planning. How do I plan? Second is task management. The third is my focus. And focus is the biggest challenge for most people. It's where I end up spending the most time with them on focus. And then the next one is organization. And then the last one you just touched on is personal care. That is so often overlooked in what we do. And I loved your analogy related to sports and an athlete who has those days where they need to recharge. So do we. We don't necessarily need to take a full day if we don't want to, but we have to build in periods where we can either allow our bodies and our minds to be able to recharge and re-energize to go back at the activities and tasks that we need to do. So those are the 5 categories that I work with people on. And then there's 20 distinct attributes in that. So as you go through those 5 and you think and reflect, just say, well, where do I think most of those happen? You don't have to work on everything at the same time. So pick one category and decide from yourself, what are some of the things that I can do to improve, say, my focus? And when you find you work in one area, the others improve because they are interrelated and interconnected sometimes.
That's a great way to put it, because I've gone on this journey myself and trying to optimize my time, and I've tried so many different methods. I've read so many different books about it. And one thing that stood out to me is if I'm going to get anywhere with it, I need to pick something and then just run with it. Let's give it some time and see if it works. Once someone starts to implement these strategies into their life, because like you said, you need to invest time in getting this right, because it is counterintuitive. You've got to retrain yourself in a lot of ways. What's the retraining period when someone really starts to seeing results that they didn't have to white knuckle like force to happen?
This is a great question, and I'll take the category of focus, and particularly an attribute within the focus category, and that's distractions. That's the number one single attribute out of all the 20 that people struggle with. It's my own personal struggle as well. And I define a distraction as it's internal, it's on you. You allow an internal disruption to take you away from something that's important to something that's less important. So if that's, say, something you're struggling with, a distraction, the easiest thing to do is I steal this from an old boss of mine who used to use the phrase all the time, creep, crawl, walk, run. So you're not going to be an athlete that's running a marathon. You need to creep, and maybe that could be walking for a block. So in the case of like a distraction, I just simply say to people, what can you do to quarantine your screens or put more discipline on your screen time? So you post something on social media in the morning. Do you need to check it at 10 o'clock to see if it's gone viral? Or can it wait until there's a time that better fits into your schedule? So simply taking small steps like quarantining the phone for maybe 2 hours if you're working on something important. Moving from one area to another if it's distracting to you, if you're allowed to do that. Cleaning up your office space because the pile that you haven't put away yet, you're constantly darting your eyes over to as you try to work on stuff. Pick even one small area of that, work on that for a couple weeks, and then you'll find, wow, I'm not as much time on social media as I thought I used to be. And that can be as little as a couple weeks, but I try to tell everybody, stay focused on one thing until you see improvement, but if not, stick with it for 30 days. And then just see how much you need to do. And again, another thing that annoys people about when I try to help them optimize their time is spend some time and track it. There are great apps out there. Toggle is one. I use Clockify myself. They're great, 2 free, robust versions that allows you to actually track your time. And you will be surprised after 2 weeks of time how much, you're like, it was 6 hours today on social media. And just so you know, the average person spends almost 3 hours on social media a day. So there's a way for you to find that. So, the rule of thumb is 30 days, give yourself to see some improvement. But if you're really diligent at it, you're going to see some marginal stuff at 2 weeks.
That's a great point because it's not going to happen overnight. There are going to be some parts of it that you struggle with. I know I have found great success because one of my big issues is distractions as well. And I figured out a way to put time limits on my social media. I took most of the social media off my phone.
That's an awesome tip right there. You may be like, I can't, what? But if it's not on there, you will find you'll get extra time out of it because you know you don't need to check it. That was a great tip.
It almost felt like inventing time because the first couple of days, I have to admit, I would pick up the phone just because I was super bored with the important task I was doing, but I would get super bored in the middle. I would grab my phone. I would look at it to start scrolling and oh, that app's not on there. Oh, well, and back to work I go. Now my focus was broken, but after 2 days, it wasn't anymore because I knew, hey, I can pick up this phone, but it's going to tell me what time it is. And I might see if someone texted me, but they probably didn't. And another thing I did, I get a lot of flack about this actually, but I put my phone on do not disturb 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And some of my close friends, they feel a little slighted about that. They're like, I noticed when I texted you, like it says, you're not taking notifications right now. Are we good? And I say, yeah, we're good, but I've got work to do. So
that is also another good tip. If you don't do it 24 hours, silence your phone during the times you need to be hyper productive. My wife does it all the time, even to me. Like there'll be silence. If she's buried into something that she needs to do, I'll go to send her a text or something and it'll say she's silenced her notifications. That just tells me she's doing something important and she'll get to it when it is. And if it was truly important, you know a way to get in touch with them if you need to.
Right. What's your thought on, like, there are a lot of, we call them mindsets, but really a mindset is kind of an overarching philosophy about a subject. And one of the things that I started doing, and this was years ago to help me understand more about optimizing my time, is everything I came across goes back to something you said a few minutes ago. Is it important or is it urgent? I don't think you use the word urgent, but you know, when you've got notifications on your computer or whatever, and that little red dot is sitting there in the corner of either your text app or your mail app, you get curious and that curiosity starts itching at you a little bit. And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind a lot of times, but 9 times out of 10, none of those emails or texts are important. They're just urgent. I'm old enough to have grown up in a house that had a telephone on the wall. I'm even old enough to have had that telephone. Like if you didn't pick up the phone, there was no answering machines yet for someone to leave a message. It was just, you either got the call or you didn't. So you probably got up out of your seat and you picked it up. You didn't know who it was. Probably wasn't even important. But it was urgent because if you didn't answer it right then, you weren't going to know who it was. So that's something I've had to untrain myself to do, is paying attention to things that are urgent but not necessarily important. So that was kind of my dipping my toe in the water moment of just asking myself that every day, just a little bit about things, and then having to reframe the definition of what is important to me and what is urgent. Urgency is a little easier to identify. It's like in the here and now, but you get into a lot of gray area when it comes to, is that important? Because if someone's trying to make plans with you and it's for later that day, do you really need to get it right then? Or could you wait till lunch and then get back to them? So how do you start working with people to relate tying their goals and the results they want into structuring their time to get them there?
And I think the first thing that you have to do is establish goals. You'd be surprised how many people really don't. They have tasks. Tasks are usually tactical things that we need to do in order to achieve a goal. So the first element that I do is, and goals need to be both personal and professional. So many times when I ask, so what are your goals? Well, if they're in sales like I was, well, I got to do $10 million this year. That's my goal before I can get a bonus or commission. And I've got to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, well, what about on your personal side? And then many times that's when things get a lot looser. Well, I haven't really thought about that. So for me, goal planning and setting needs to include both personal and professional life for you to integrate it together. So to me, establishing those goals and then you break down is, well, how of the timing of those goals, what's it going to take for me to get those goals done? I have goals as little as 2 weeks out. Those are my short-term goals, but I have goals out for 4 or 5 years. There's not a lot of meat behind it. I haven't built a lot of structure behind it, but one of my goals for next year, 2025, is to hike the Grand Canyon rim to rim. So I'm slowly creeping my way to planning the things I need to do to be able to do that as it relates to exercise on the personal care side. But what's the strategy I have to do for being able to get to one side of the rim to the other? Who's going to help me, or do I need to do this on my own? So all that stuff needs to lay out there. So first and foremost is set your goals, then set the tactics around those goals, then try to figure out how much time it's going to take. And if it's an important goal, let's say you decide it's going to take me 15 hours to get this goal done, then I say you need to add 50% on top of that if it's important. So in it's 15, it's 22 and a half hours, because anything that's important in our lives never goes as we plan it.
For sure.
So add the more time. And guess what? If you get it done instead of 15 hours, you get it done in 20, but you budgeted 22 and a half, you now have, quote, found 2.5 hours of time to figure out what you want to do with it.
I like that a lot. What's your thought on the difference? I've seen a lot of people in the research that I've been doing about optimizing my time better over the years. There is a camp that says, yes, define your goals, but day to day, write out a to-do list, get your to-do list done, do the hardest thing on the to-do list first. But then there's a whole camp that says, no, a to-do list doesn't take your time into account. You need to put those items on the calendar and assign them a specific time of day or a specific day of the week that you're going to get those things done. Then you've actually allocated the time to do it, which is much more of an investment than just writing it on a piece of paper. What's your thought on those two ways of doing tasks?
I lean more towards the second, but I actually teach a little bit of a combination of the two. And your to-do list is what you need to do. It's the activity. The calendar is the time you're going to allocate. So it's both of those together that end up really giving you the whole picture of what you want to do. I am very much about deciding what your task list needs to be and then prioritizing that task. But then the idea is go fill that space in that you think you can get it done, because it could be an important task and you look at your day and say, there's no way I'm going to get this done. And that's what a lot of people do. They have this toxic positiveness that says, well, I've got 8 things to do today and I'm stuck in 6 hours of meetings. Yeah, I think I can get it done. They can't. And so you then have to prioritize. Yeah. And one of the first things I do with my clients when they come on board is show me your calendar. And they'll show me their calendar, and it's usually populated with a series of events. Most of the time it's meetings either they have initiated or someone has initiated their desire to want them to be there. And then the rest is filled with open space. And I said, what are you going to do here? Well, I got 5 things on my to-do list today, and I'll plug that in that open time. And I'm going, what happens if someone comes along and wants your time in a meeting? Well, I'll go to that meeting, and then I have to rearrange how I do things. Yeah. When you lay out your calendar, you open up your ability to negotiate with others then for the use of your time.
That's a really, really powerful reframe. That's something I can certainly learn from, because in my calendar, if I showed you my calendar right now, my calendar has my commitments on it. So what that means is, like, you and I are talking right now at, what time is it? 1 o'clock.
Noon Central.
Noon Central. At 1 o'clock, you'll see a red block that says Talk with David, and it's for the podcast. And so I know, because it's red, I know what it's for. It's for the podcast. If it was blue, that means it's something personal, because later at 3 o'clock, I am going to pick up my daughter from school, and that's in blue. So those are my commitments. You're available at 1 o'clock. My daughter needs to be picked up at 3. So those are things I need to be there at that time for. And you're right. Everything else is white space, because I've got this old school pad of paper right here.
Nothing wrong with that either. Nothing wrong with that.
And on that, it says, pay my HOA bill, pay my DMV bill, send someone a contract for some work, and polish an email that goes out tomorrow. So those are the things that can happen anytime today. They are a commitment, but they're not a time specific commitment. So I love what you said. I'm going to have to think more about that. And does that come into what people start talking about when they describe time blocking? So maybe put a chunk in the calendar that says, take care of all the little minutia of life, like paying the DMV bill.
Yes, that's a system of time blocking. Time blocking in its purest sense says you block off a period of time, take a short break, go to the next period of time. But in essence, yes. And I know some people might be thinking as they're listening, saying, well, I can't just block off this time. I'm either in customer service, I could have clients calling me, or I've got employees doing that. Well, anyone who has an email exchange server has a built-in task function and calendar function on the electronic thing. So if your calendar is being seen by others, whether by clients or people inside your organization, and you say, okay, I want to block off an hour's time for administrative time to do some of the tasks that you just listed. What I tell everybody to do is you just don't have to mark it busy. So you see it on your calendar, but nobody else does. And I have that in my calendar's fully blocked, but there's a lot of that time only I can see. So then if a client wants to book a meeting with me through my calendar system, they can do that. They won't see it. However, if it's important to me, like I had client work to do today where I blocked 3 hours off, that's blocked on my calendar. Nobody's interrupting that time because I had some important work I had to do to deliver to that client. And so nobody else could schedule something. And that allowed me to stay focused in that particular area.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's a great way to frame it. And one of the things that I really been wanting to talk to you about is there are 3 types of people I can think of who are so proud to tell you all about how they work and what they do. And those are crossfitters and vegans and then multitaskers. Have you ever met someone and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a multitasker, and it's almost like you want to get them a t-shirt and maybe a coffee mug, and I don't know, they're just really proud of it. But what is your take on multitasking?
It's a wonderful question, and probably one of the comments that annoys my clients the most out of me is I tell them that you can't multitask. I don't believe in that as a proponent of being able to do something. And here's why. Our brains, not by me, this is research from people a lot smarter than me, who say that our brains are only wired to do one thing at a time. So if someone says, no, I'm multitasking, I'm like, no, you are either doing 2 or 3 things halfway, trying to do it at the same time, or you're microtasking. You're just jumping from one task to the other. So I try to tell people, get out of the mindset that you can multitask. Probably the closest thing I would say to multitasking for me is a musician. And I'll look at my favorite rock group is Rush. The lead singer, Geddy Lee, he plays the guitar, bass guitar. He has a synthesizer, and he also sings. He can be doing all 3 of those at the same time. He came out with his autobiography, and he said, however, he says, I have found, because I have spent decades playing these songs and hours practicing, he said, I'll be in the middle of singing, playing my guitar, and thinking, what's the next song we're doing again? And so he's not multitasking there. He has trained his brain through repetition and hours to do that. And I would say, do you want to spend hours and hours and hours to try to figure out how I can do my email while I'm sitting in a meeting with my boss? I wouldn't recommend that. So pick that task, do it to your best of ability, or say, I'm going to work on this fully for 5 minutes. I'm going to shift back to the next one for 5 minutes. But whatever you do, give it your intentional all on that, and microtask, don't multitask.
Really good advice, because it's also true that anything you do with focus and repetition, you're going to get better at, and you're going to get probably more efficient and faster at. So you're going to complete those tasks, even though you're only focusing on that one thing, you're going to get it wrapped up a little faster. You know, after a good amount of repetition and proficiency, and then you can move on to the other stuff. Does that apply? I've heard of people trying to study while listening to music, and that is like, I love music and I'm a pretty proficient reader. I can't do both. And I don't know if that's just because my brain is not wired that way, but some people say, oh yeah, I have to, or they have to have the background movie playing on Netflix while they type emails or do work. And that short circuits me. What is that, pretty much multitasking?
Yeah, my view there is that they're having a hard time being focused, and that's an excuse for them to do a secondary level activity to help them study more. And I don't, again, anyone out there who's saying, no, I have to do that, I'm not going to challenge you. If you get done what you need to do and you can listen to music, I can't do that. The only time that I will listen to music or a podcast or something is either if I'm walking, because that's a pretty standard thing. And then I still have to find myself, oh, that was a good point. Let me rewind that. But it's a lower level task or activity. Or I'll listen to music, for example, if I have to update a large data set on a spreadsheet where it's very tactical, copy and pasting, doing something
Right.
that's a secondary lower level task activity that doesn't require me to understand and analyze anything. I'm just formatting. But other than that, anything that's a higher level brain function, I find, for me, it's distracting. But I will tell people, if it works for you and you are getting things done, I am not here to try to tell you to break what may not be a bad habit, but I would challenge yourself and see,
Right.
is that really, can you be a little bit more productive if you quieted the noise a little bit?
Or are you just bored?
Oh, yeah, just bored.
Right. I'm curious, is there something that you find you run up against with your clients? Let's take two categories of clients: people who are super high achievers and they're trying to get maybe to the next level. Their set of skills has gotten them where they are, and they look around and they're not satisfied with where they are and they want to up their game. And they know to do that. It's kind of similar to what you realized in the beginning of your sales career. You wanted to be at a certain place and you knew it was going to be more advantageous for you to be over prepared, more prepared than your competition. So you took the steps necessary to get there. And then let's just take the person who hasn't really developed the skills of optimizing their time at all. Are there things that they have in common, or do you see certain roadblocks, things that the high achievers run up against before they have to retrain themselves versus people who are just getting into it?
Great question. So the high achievers, typically what I find is they're headed on a trajectory that leads them to lead people. So what happens, and I can speak from experience for me as I went up in my career, is I was anal with my time. Not a lot of other people were with theirs, and particularly direct reports. And so I had to adapt to say, where can I find the strengths? And I always felt I was never the best pure salesperson. I had people who worked underneath me who were better pure sales people than me. And so at that point in a leadership role position, you have to say, what can I do to coach and train my strengths to my team members? Because you can't expect the same thing. If you're all organized, your calendar's great, everything's doing it. Trust me, there are people on your team that's not. So what's the way you're going to be able to positively motivate them and show them the benefits to say, this is how I do things, or these are ways I recommend? So that's, I'm saying, for someone who's hyper or wants to get to the next level, who's very organized. Then for the person who starts out originally, and I found this a couple of years ago, I worked with a bunch of college students. There was a organization that helped prepared kids in college to use their time better, and they commissioned me. And what I found there is the idea that forced structure was coming on them. So you talked earlier about when we're young and kids, it was really time mean to us. Parents tell us to be here, we do that.
Yeah.
Then as we're in school, it gets a little bit more structured. Then you're in college and it's on you, because the only structure you really have is the classroom time. Then the rest is on you. But then when you start your career, all of a sudden, if you work 48 hours a week, for example, and you sleep 7 hours a night, that's 40% of your awake time that's structured. And if you're not knowing how to manage your time well, that can be a challenge. So that's where I say you do your creep, crawl, walk, run, find 1 or 2 areas, find an accountability partner. If you have a boss, say to your boss, what are areas I could do to help make sure I'm more efficient? And you start with one of those areas and work on it. And you'll find there'll be other areas that are interrelated that you improve with.
Got it. It sounds like with the high achievers, you get to a point where you're having not only to develop and embody these practices to optimize your time, but now you are having to set the example, plus perhaps train other people to come along on that journey with you so that the whole organization thrives.
Correct. And I would also challenge leaders, because I get this a lot. So, hey, I want you to come and help my team. And so, great. First step, take the assessment. Everyone takes the assessment except the boss. And then I have to go back to the boss and say,
Right.
why don't you take the assessment? Well, I don't have a problem managing my time. Let's see. Just take it.
Well, let's find out.
And then we do
Right.
find out. They find out areas like, oh, I do procrastinate a little bit, or I'm not as organized as I thought. So there are avenues in there that can be a way for somebody who thinks they know how to manage their time. Challenge yourself and say, still, is there one area I can improve upon? Or better yet, ask others, ask family members. They'll be more than happy to tell you where you're probably not doing well.
Yes, they are.
Yep.
Yes, they are. Have you ever had a situation? It sounds like you have, but I don't know how the evaluation works necessarily. But if that manager says, hey, I just want you to give this to my team, and then you come up with the results from this evaluation, and there are maybe, let's say out of 5 team members, there are 3 who have better organizational or time management skills than the manager. And you have to say, hey, just want to deliver this. Don't shoot the messenger. But out of your team, you need this the most. What's the reaction there?
So I get to do it in a soft way. I don't have to be direct, because what happens is the individual members take their assessment, then the leader takes the assessment, but I roll it up to a team average.
Okay.
And I really tell the leader, please don't make me or don't make your employees share with you the assessment, because if somebody's struggling with procrastination, I want a leader to look at them and say, wow, that's something negative. I've got to fix that. So what happens is when usually the team assessment that only gets sent to the leader gets to compare how his team is to himself on average. And I break it down. So the leader might say, well, I do poor in procrastination. And then he looks and says, well, half of my team self-rated better than I did. And that can be sometimes a motivation for the leader to say, well, maybe, and I've had some really good ones that said, I actually went back to the team and said, all right, everybody, you rated yourselves great on procrastination. Give me some tips as to why you do that. And the team got tighter as a result.
Flipping the script and making it a teachable moment for themselves,
right.
Which is what leadership's all about. You've got to set the example, but you also have to take input from your team. So that's fantastic. Let's transition into, we've been talking about time that helps us be productive. Let's talk about that transition from all those years of life where you're productive, you're at work, you're getting kids here and there, and then the kids go do their life thing, and you're still at work being productive for another, 15, 20 years after that. Then you got to figure out, okay, now that I don't have all of that, what I call the grind, once I don't have the grind anymore, what do people do? Because you've heard, I've read the articles that a lot of people, if they just retire and decide to, start playing golf every day, their health declines pretty quick after the first couple of years of not really knowing what they want to do with their time. And I guess maybe it comes back to goals. Mm-hmm. But what's your observation on people who are making that transition or well into that transition in their use of their time and the effects on their health?
So there is actually statistics done by, I think it was the Centers for Disease Control, so please don't hold me to that, but that's what comes to my mind, that actually people who retire early have a 2% chance of dying within their first 5 years than if they wait to 65. Now, there's a whole host of variables that play into that, But to me, one of those is that people, when we're working, we have a tendency to power through the pain, the struggles, feeling well, because that job is giving us purpose. We're living into it. And if someone chooses to retire without having anything to do, then what happens is those health issues become more pronounced. And they find that in some cases, they had a pre-existing condition that was laying dormant there that now they haven't treated. Cancer is an example of that. But all of a sudden, people are like, whoa, that came out of nowhere. Well, it was in there. They were ignoring the symptoms. And I go back to the 40% rule that I talked about before. Flip that. If you work in 48 hours, sleep in 7 hours, you have to now find out what to do with 40% of your awake time. And that can be challenging. And golfing, that's an activity. That's not a lifestyle. So typically that goes back to the first thing I do with people is say, define for me your purpose in life. And that purpose is broader than their corporate life. But really, what is it that gets you up in the morning? And that's a little bit difficult for people because it makes them think differently. But once you define what that purpose is, and for mine, my purpose statement is to make the most of the time that God has given me. That's how simple that is. But then everything that I need to do that's important in my life must be done through that lens. Am I using that time? Is this what I'm planning? Really using my time to the best of my ability? And you can stay as high level to that or as granular. But that's the first thing. And I recommend that for anybody at any stage of their life, but particularly those who are thinking about retirement. Define your ultimate purpose. And what is it that's going to get you up in the morning to do things?
And that's what it comes down to with a lot of things in satisfaction in life. I talk to so many people, and I know for people who have heard the podcast a lot, you've heard me say this a ton, but a joyful rebellion is all about that time in life where you have really checked all the boxes of what you thought and what people told you success would look like. And maybe you've got the kids, you've got the college degree, you've got the job, and on the outside, it looks fantastic and you know you should feel fantastic, but you don't. And then you have to decide, okay, what do I do now to get a life I love better? I talk to people every single week who have either been through their own joyful rebellion or they help others get through it like you're doing. And they all say the same thing. You have to know your purpose. You have to define your purpose. And until you do that, you don't have anything to work toward. Necessarily, you're just kind of flailing around without a plan. So that is super powerful. And that goes from your career years to your parenting years, all the way through your retirement years. So thank you for that perspective. David, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to know more about what you do, how you help people? I know you got a book as well. It's called Time Optimized.
Yeah, thank you, James. Again, appreciate what an honor to be on here. A couple of things, sure. The first one is, if you want to go to my website, it's infinitylifestyledesign.com. At the top, there is actually a link where you can download chapter 1 of my book, or it shows you it's for sale basically everywhere, the Time Optimized Life. But also on the front page, there are all the resources that I offer, the programs, and there's an opportunity for anyone who wants to take the assessment I talked about. I have 2 of them, the time management analysis for those people predominantly in career. You can take that, or the retirement time analysis to help you kind of prepare for that post-career life. Each one of those, there's a link on my front page, and you can take those and get your assessment for free. I just encourage you to take a look around there. And then from there, you can contact me from the site if you'd like to learn more about the programs.
All right. Well, thank you for that. And it'll be in the show notes as well. So if you're listening right now and you want to just quick link, just go to the show notes, hit it with your thumb on your phone, and you are there. David, thank you so much for all that you've given us. Is so much great value here. I know a lot of people listening will get some great takeaways, and if not for them, great takeaways, at least a lot to think about. So thank you for that.
Hopefully we didn't make time boring.
That's important. We can't be doing that. We got to make the most of it. So got to keep it informative, pack value, and keep it exciting. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this content and are thinking about ways to share your story, or even get more joy out of your life, I have a free ebook that I'd love to share with you. It's called Plotting Your Joyful Rebellion, and I designed it to be a 5-step field guide full of guerrilla warfare tactics to help prepare you to overthrow any of the parts of your life you feel the call to rebel against. Go to ajoyfulrebellion.com and click on the link right there at the top to claim your free copy of the book. Again, that's ajoyfulrebellion.com, or simply hit the link at the top of the show notes. What sort of rebellion are you plotting right now? I'd love to hear about it. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or through the website at ajoyfulrebellion.com. Thanks again for listening today, and be sure to stop by next week for another episode full of joyful rebellion.